got back from Uganda yesterday. It was my first time there, so it was a really interesting trip. I learned a lot, some of which I hope we can share with you today. We've actually been working in Uganda for 3 years. This will be our 4th year, so it's not a new origin in many ways, but for us, like we've been working for 7 or 10 years in a lot of countries, so it's relatively new in comparison to a lot of other countries we work. It's also quite new in terms of specialty. We'll go through a little bit about that here as well. So the heading, or it's like my talk is Uganda, but it's a little tagline is not the soft life. It's a very funny expression I learned now while traveling around Uganda. So a lot of people want what they call the soft life, just a life where they can relax and things are easy. But as I learned, coffee in Uganda, as like most parts of the world, it's not the soft life if you're choosing coffee. So hence the tagline here. So also, I'm big into geography and us understanding where these countries are that we work. There's a lot of them, often quite obscure for those of us who don't travel too much. But that's Africa, of course, and then the red part is Uganda, so where the country is situated. And then you can see here in the north it borders South Sudan, in the east Kenya, in the south Tanzania, and touches on Rwanda just on the corner, and then in the west the DRC. The areas where Arabica is grown, we'll go through quickly. So then up in what's circled by in green there, an area in the northwest. So Nebi is one of the small towns, also an area called Zombo, that's quite well known for growing Arabica. Then further north, the area called Lambo is also growing Arabica coffee. And in the east is an area, we call it Mbale, but it's also referred to as Bugisu often. So that's on the border with Kenya and around Mount Elgin. So you see a lot of Arabica growing there, and very distinctive practices compared to the rest of the country because it's close to Kenya, so you have that influence to some extent. The rest of the northeast, there's no coffee really being grown. Then if you move to other parts of the country in the far south, you've got Kisoro and Kabale, there's Arabica being grown there. And then along the southwest is an area with a mountain range called the Rwenzoris, and there's a lot of coffee grown in this area. And then everything in the middle is Robusta, basically, except for this area in the northeast that's not really growing coffee. And that's quite an important part about understanding production in Uganda, because it's historically heavy volumes or larger volumes of Robusta in the production, and hence also somewhat more commercial than a lot of other countries that we work traditionally. But that's part of the challenge, but also it's part of the opportunity for us to work somewhere like this. So then just to give you an idea, the main places that we're focusing on at the moment are in the east and in the southwest. Of course, it's relatively new and in the beginning stages for us in terms of development, so we really believe that we'll develop into further areas that are producing Arabica, but we want to remain real focused and concentrated to do good work in the beginning phases now. Here's another map just to give you an idea of how much of the country is producing Arabica versus Robusta. So the green area is the areas that are producing Robusta. All of the red and light red the dark red is solely Arabica, and the light red it can be a little bit of a mix. It touches on the areas that also have some Robusta. So that is also something that when you're in production you have to be aware of and sort of watch out for. But we're working with good partners, and the seasons for Arabica and Robusta are a little bit different, so it's not a huge problem, but it is something you have to be aware of. Also, just to give you an idea of the size of the country and how widely spread out the production is, because it's also an element of how to work there and the challenges that are involved in working there in production is across such a huge geography. So, production. These figures are like approximate and of course varying a little bit from year to year. So the 2019 to 2020 production that we have some market data from, there are 5 million bags, kg bags of coffee in total produced in Uganda. But if you go a little further back, 3-4 years, it's more like 3 million. So somewhere between 3 to 5 million is the sort of current production that's happening from year to year. 80% of that is Robusta. So that's a huge proportion, and a huge focus of the production there is on Robusta. And the Robusta is processed naturally. On the side here, I just wanted to bring up, like, they have an organization in Uganda called the UCDA, the Ugandan Coffee Development Authority. And so they have a website where they publish research done within the country, production, and of course, like, an idea of price points. And these are the categories that they use for dividing the coffee production across the country. I'll talk a little bit more about what these mean in terms of the different kinds of coffee produced. To talk a little bit about Robusta first, I thought it'd be interesting for you just to see and understand Robusta, as it is such a huge part of their production, even though it's not a part of what we're doing there. So this is an example of how you'll see Robusta being produced or processed, let's say. So the cherry are picked and they're dried on tops on the ground. And this is done predominantly by small producers all over the country. And then how it works is that they sell the dried cherry to middlemen or intermediaries that are sort of coffee traders. And those coffee traders will go around the country, buy the Robusta, and then they will deliver it to a exporting company. And that's important to understand because both for Arabica and Robusta, actually collecting the coffee that's produced is quite complex because it is produced over a huge space or geographically very far distances. So, and also the individual producers have a very, very low yield per tree because they're not doing very much to increase the production of their land and the trees that they have. So it's very important, and it's a very complex part of being able to produce volumes. There's actually working across quite a large space area that people are producing and growing coffee. So then just some more pictures about how it looks. That's it. Yeah, of course.
2 slides back.
Yeah.
Are those 2 different grades of coffee then?
No, so this is just fresher cherry, more recently picked. That's drying on the right-hand side, and then the darker cherry on the left is just been drying for longer. The reason it's interesting to see that is because when you see the fresher cherry, you can see the green and yellow mixed amongst the red. As it dries, you can't see that anymore. Yeah. Of course, that's sorted out to a certain extent in the post-harvest processing, so the hulling and grading of the coffee, which can be done to a very good level. It can be the same way in some countries for Arabica as well, but we see that it's harder and harder the longer you wait in the process of sorting coffee. It gets harder and harder to maintain quality and sort out the bad if you wait till the end phases. Are there any other questions? Please feel free if there's something that comes up or you want to ask, just shout out. Yeah, so that's just some idea about Robusta and how it's kind of just an example of a green sort of hulled and sorted Robusta coffee. So how this happens, or how this works is, as I said, producers all over the country, intermediaries collecting the coffee. Those intermediaries or coffee traders will then deliver large amounts of Robusta to mills and buyers in Kampala. So they will be situated all around the country, and then they will deliver that coffee centrally in the capital. And that's where it will, samples will be taken, it will be analyzed, a price will be determined, and an agreement will they'll come to an agreement, buy the coffee, and then it will be processed in Kampala and then exported. So that's the kind of traditional model on which coffee growing and production in Uganda is kind of based. A bit because that's the majority of the production that's happening. So the whole infrastructure of the country is based around producing and working for this kind of coffee, or working in producing and processing this kind of coffee. And so that, of course, has an impact on how they approach Arabica. And so this is part of the challenge because it's very commercial and it's very orientated towards volumes and less around quality. But this challenge is also an opportunity because then you can see that there are very small ways that you can work with the partners who are willing and who want to improve small parts throughout the whole of the supply chain, to improve the product a little bit in every part, and then end up with a much better product than what we currently see coming out of Uganda. So that's what we are doing with partners, and what we also partners that we have, but we also believe that there's even more potential to do this in the years to come. So that's what I think is very exciting about the coffee that we're working with in Uganda. So In terms of Arabica, it accounts then for 20% of the production approximately. Arabica is being produced both washed and natural. And then some of the terms that they use locally in Uganda is kiboko is a word that's used to describe the cherry, the coffee cherry. Drugar is like they have some terms around like the commercial production of coffee. And it's interesting because they're still very much used and often even used when coffees are being done at a better level in the field. But if you talk to a lot of the traders or companies working in coffee, they will use these words for the more commercial ideas of the coffee and then the more universal phrases when they're doing sort of a specialty version of it. So for example, Drugar stands for dried Ugandan Arabica, and Wugar stands for washed Ugandan Arabica. So Drugar being drying the cherries, so a natural, and Wugar being washing, helping in washing, being washed. And Rugisu is another term used for, it's actually an area, like I said in the picture of the map, it's an area in the east, near Mbale, but it's also commonly a term used for coffees that are dried to parchment level by producers, rather than cherry being delivered. So that's where a producer would have like a small, like micro pulper, and then they would dry the parchment themselves. But those are sort of just like colloquial phrases. When we actually work with the suppliers that we have, when we talk about actually doing a natural coffee, they don't refer to it as a druga because in their minds, this is a more commercial version of a natural coffee. Sorry, yeah, a natural coffee. And Wugar and Rugisu would also be like a commercial version of a washed coffee. So that these terms are used and they are more in the local way of discussing coffee, but it's actually also something that has like a slightly different version of like quality. But a lot of what we're doing now in terms of quality and producing coffee is quite unusual, quite different from what the majority of what's happening in Uganda. Okay, so then we have two partners. One is in the southwest, in that kind of like, there's a big forest called Windy Impenetrable Forest. So it's close to this area that we work with one of our partners who has a washing station. He's a Canadian man who set the washing station up some years ago after being in Uganda for some years. And we started working with him first, or in the early stages of working in Uganda. And then we have another partner who's in the west, who I'll go through afterwards. So the name of the washing station is King Estate. It's been the fourth year that we'll be working together. So he has really a good setup in terms of the way he's built the washing station for protocols and workflow for producing coffee. He has a small amount of land as well. At the moment it's not producing, but we expect the next 4 years to be producing some cherry. So right now he's buying cherry from smallhold farmers in the surrounding areas. And the way it works is that there's kind of different hills around him that you can go, and then there would be like a number of producers in that area who are growing. And he would usually, during the peak of the harvest, send trucks and then collect cherry and then bring it to the washing station where he processes it. He can get day-to-day deliveries, but the washing station is also kind of up on a hill, so it's quite a hike, and he's discouraged it because it's very hard in coffee producing when farmers bring cherry to actually turn them away. And sometimes you have to, because in the peak of the season, your washing station can only produce a certain level of capacity, and when you start to receive more and more cherry, you actually can't manage to process well if you have too much volume. So it's kind of always this balance of having enough volume to make running the washing station profitable, but not too much that you're going to lose control over the protocols and the processes and hence have a bad quality or with less, not good quality. So we'll go through a little bit about the different ways that different kinds of coffee that he's producing. So he's doing washed, natural, some extended fermentation, and some anaerobic coffees, which you're going to be able to cut on the table just now. So at the moment we have washed coffee, and we have normal wash, we have an anaerobic wash, an anaerobic natural, and a natural. So this is an example of the coffee cherry being delivered at the washing station. So this is kind of what it looks like. I would say this is not normal in Uganda, but he's been there for some years and he's been working with producers so they understand what kind of level of quality he's looking for or willing to accept. Of course, the price is also varying depending on what you're delivering. That is a little bit dependent on each operation and how they're choosing to work. Then they're sorting for floaters. So I just thought this was really interesting because these buckets have the holes made in here are so that they can sort and remove floaters, but somebody has to physically bang like nails into that bucket to make those holes. And it's just like, wow, the things you don't think about when you live in a world where everything is convenient and easy. But this is the way they are. They were first putting that bucket into a bigger bucket of water and putting the cherries inside these buckets and moving the cherries and removing the ones that float because they are lighter and less quality. So I think we have a video.
I have a question. When you zipper the cherries, you make each lot for each farmer, or there are two small farmers and you make a lot from one day for taking cherries?
They're two small farms, so each farmer will bring, some kgs. Sometimes a small amount, not even a full bag, and sometimes a couple of bags of cherry. But you're gonna, if you're gonna pulp the cherry or if you're gonna dry it whole, you're going to lose a lot of volume. So every lot is an accumulation of smaller lots. This is what coffee is in any way. Even a single farmer has big volumes. He's always having to combine different pickings from different days in order to make enough volume. So we have done some like separation. So in time periods of production, that's important for us to maintain like quality and freshness of coffee. Or for example, his own farm, when he had production, we kept those coffees separate. We've also tried to work with like one single producer who has some volume near him, a gentleman called Vincent. And so we're trying to also get him to deliver enough of his cherry to us so we can have like a separate lot from him. But it's in the making.
And the second question is about varieties. What kind of varieties?
Mostly SL varieties in Arabica, yeah. I think there are some development internally with the Ugandan Coffee Authority, Development Authority, but there's also a lot of skepticism about the quality of their seedlings. So we will see. What did we get to? Yeah, okay. So that was just a video showing you what they do with the buckets. So this is what's happening. So the cherry are either, if they're washed, it's pulp fermented and dried. The naturals where the whole cherry are dried. And then the anaerobic is where the cherry are fermented in a closed environment. And then the cherry are either pulped and dried as like an anaerobic washed, or the fermented cherry are then dried whole as an anaerobic natural. We have a lot of different kinds of processes now in our operators, and it can be a little confusing, so I just wanted to go through what that looks like in particularly with this specific farm. So this is, let me get rid of this guy. This is some images. So here is this area here is the tanks that the cherry are put into. And they can, he didn't have it uncovered, but he has like here he has the eco pulper, a smaller one, and then here is like an even larger one on the left hand side. So the cherry are floated, then they're passed through the eco pulper to be pulped, and then these are the tanks. They have two ways of doing it. They can ferment in these tanks, or they can take the coffee through these tanks and coming out of these bottom pipes here, and then put into those black buckets behind where they then can ferment. When he's doing special, like extended fermentation lots, which we haven't got any at the moment, he also uses those black tanks on the background for holding the cherry to ferment them, because those would not be anaerobic because they're not closed in a closed environment. And then all of the pulped coffee is then placed onto drying beds, like raised beds, you can see in the last picture, and given a label as to what the coffee is, when it arrived, when it was, like what quality of cherry, they sort of give us like a G2 and G1 and G2 definition. So that's how the washed coffees are prepared. The naturals, the normal naturals, the coffees will come. The same floating process will happen to remove the light cherries. Then the cherries will go straight onto the table, drying beds, like in the first picture there. Again with the label telling me when the coffees have arrived, what quality the cherry was. Then they're dried in this way. They will be covered at night, and if it rains, that's what the yellow plastic on the side is. For the anaerobic coffees, he's putting them into the bags, like here, and then covering them, and then they're staying there, and then for like 3 days, and then they're coming out onto the tables to be dried. That's in the last picture. So those are the different processes that he's doing for us at the moment, or that we have on the table at the moment. There are also sometimes some extended fermentations, which I haven't gone through here. Are there any questions about the Kenya estates and these coffees?
How common is it to have a washing station like this in this part of Uganda?
I mean, it was my first time traveling there now, so I have relatively limited experience. But from what I can see, there's not a lot of, especially set up to this level of, like, to this standard, let's say, because a lot of coffee is being sort of like picked and processed to a certain level by the individual farmers. And then there's kind of people coming in to capitalize on that or to monetize that by buying and then delivering into the capital, because this is also difficult, to get to this area. We flew and then we drove. So to transport coffee, we've got like a 6-hour drive. Not a lot of individual farmers can do that, and a lot of people are set up in the way that this gentleman is to process and to manage the whole or broader part of the supply chain. Because the way of doing it there is that producers process to a certain level, these intermediaries come, they capitalize on that and then deliver these coffees into Kampala. So there's not a lot of this level of production happening.
I can just to put it in perspective a little bit. So I've been there quite a bit the last 2 years as well. So I think, like I can't remember exactly, but they probably have 3 times as much Arabica as in Rwanda, for instance. And I think maybe there's just ballpark figure, 30 washing stations that are operating well now, while in Rwanda they have a couple of hundreds. So meaning there's like hardly no proper washing stations in Uganda yet compared to the production of Arabica.
Would you say that there's more in the east by Kenya, like washing stations, than in the southwest?
A little bit more, but they're they're not like operating as a normal washing station, because many of them, maybe there's a pulper, like you mentioned earlier, there can be a community pulper, and they're drying the coffee differently. But they also have, like in the west, in the Revensoris that Joanne mentioned, there's let's say, compared to, let's say, of the 30, there's a decent amount in the west as well, but generally just very few washing stations everywhere where there's Arabica.
The only other washing stations we saw are like ports, like production places, because it's also for natural, so it's not necessarily doing wash, but we're set up by bigger companies who are scaling and who are investing in the production, but they're not this kind of, like what you see in Rwanda, Burundi, a lot of privately owned washing stations set up all over the country, sort of adding to that part of the production and then delivering a kind of different kind of product.
You see home processed coffee everywhere, right? In Rwanda, Burundi, how it used to be, but like there's also washing stations everywhere. Like in Rwanda, it doesn't sound like this is like a weird thing. You drove by this, you wouldn't know what it was.
Definitely, it's definitely not normal. But there's still saying that there's still quite a lot of competition internally for cherry, because there's this whole other element that runs in parallel, which is these intermediaries or these sort of traders who are coming to buy either dried or even cherry in some cases, but then they are doing like naturals.
in this instance, who is deciding on the length of the fermentation?
We have worked together with this sort of with Kingsley, who owns the washing station, for some years to develop that. So initially he was doing a lot of different experiments around different fermentation times and different kind of naturals, and then we would couple them and then we would give feedback and we would try to produce more of the ones that we preferred. We sort of tried to streamline it a lot over the last couple of years and agreed together. So we kind of have a protocol now that we found works best in Uganda, but not only, like actually a protocol we're working in different parts of the world, especially for very distinctive fermentation. You know, normal fermentation of pulped coffees, that's like it's sort of a function to just get rid of the sugar. So that's not really so technical as you trying to impart a flavor to the coffee. But what we found is that actually the kind of fermentations where you actually try to impart a flavor of fermentation into the coffee, it's pretty standardized. Too little is not enough to make an impact on flavor. Too long wastes your time and costs you money. So we have kind of like a standard 3 days fermentation, 2-3 days fermentation.
But it's not like, for instance, Vincent comes by with his coffee, and Kingsley says, "Okay, it's Vincent. We know the quality is high. We're gonna give his coffee maybe like 72 hours of fermentation."
No, so actually with Vincent's coffee, we've just been doing it washed. Because he does produce very good coffee. Did I mention his name already?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I just came up with that.
Wow. He's a friend of mine. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, it could be. No, so we've just been doing his coffee washed because there's also an element of like needing to produce really great washed coffees to show ourselves and everybody else what these coffees can be. We're still uncovering that a little bit because you're also always working against some things within the supply chain that are challenging. Things still like sorting and milling and getting to export level in a way that is to our standard is still a challenge, right? So for really good coffees, it's often that are specific like that, we're doing washed. And then we also want to do, of course, for coffees coming from other outgrowers, that's not specific like Vincent, then it's we can create more different kind of profiles because we can have more volume. And then it makes sense. But it's not that, okay, because the cherry is this good, we're going to do this kind of, first of all, we're trying to get actually all the same level of cherry. The time that's the hardest is in the beginning and at the end of the harvest, really.
But it's not like, let's say, half goes into a wash process and then we do 25% in extended fermentation.
No, it's more practical than that. It's more like, okay, cherry is delivered, this amount of cherry is delivered today. Where do we have space to do which kind of process?
Makes more sense, yeah.
So, okay, our tables are filled, drying naturals takes a lot of space. So, okay, we should do some pulp to wash coffees because we have space to hold those while they ferment, and then we can dry the other coffee a bit more, and then we can move. So it's more trying to manage that practical part of it. And I'd say, I mean, it varies depending on how much capacity you have, but any washing station anywhere in the world that has a lot of capacity, that also costs you money to have. So you always need to balance with how big your setup is, what your costs of running are, as to how much coffee you need to put through your site. I think that's one of the hardest things, and the thing that sometimes impacts quality in a negative way is people's inability to manage that well, to understand, okay, what I should process now because of what capacity I have in the different areas of my production in order to make sure that I don't take coffees off the table too early so they suffer, or I don't have coffee sitting, like cherry delivered and then sitting and I can't process because I don't have a big enough eco bubble. Those are the kind of things that actually really affect the quality of the coffee.
Do you feel that you sometimes miss out on quality due to lack of space to process coffees?
At the moment, not with this setup, because the owner is very cautious about volume. In fact, we're trying to get him to do more, and he's, no, I need it to be good. So I would say, like, no, not right now here, but in some cases it can be the case. But here now, quality is really the emphasis, and he's even rather buy less cherry and produce less coffee, but to produce it at a really high quality. It's always like a balance, also for us, because what we have seen with Uganda in particular is that we haven't yet been able to get like really consistent and high volumes so that we can share the coffees of the broader market, like more of our customers. And then that makes it hard for all of you to make it a part of your sort of stable part of your portfolio, what you offer your clients, because you're only able to get 10 bags or 5 bags or whatever every season. So we are trying really hard to maintain quality, but also scale up to a certain level.
Last question.
Yeah,
Sorry for everybody.
No, it's good.
You mentioned inconsistency in supply. What are the main reasons that you can get consistency in Uganda right now?
Um, I think it's a lot of people working in a different way than how specialty works. So with King Estate, for example, from the beginning, that's been quite easy. Well, not going to say easy, that's emotional, shoot me down for saying that. It's not been easy at all, but at least the owner, he understands quality and that's what he wants to achieve.
And he's open to change, maybe.
Yeah, and he wants to implement that all the way down through his own operation and supply chain that he has with farmers, with his work, with people that work at the site. Many other kind of partners are coming from a more commercial side, and now they see that there is value and capacity to produce specialty coffee and really great coffees from Uganda, but their starting point is very different. They start from commercial production and seeing things a certain way, and now they're trying to shift gear and do things more towards specialty. That's it's challenging, or you have to work to get to a level where you're both understanding each other and you're going in the direction to get the results that you're both looking for. But it takes a little bit more time. Of course, Kingsley has also had his own challenges because of the same thing. Because a lot of workers in coffee or people with experience in working in coffee would come to him and have a different idea of how to work around coffee because they've worked somewhere else that doesn't do it to this level. So none of it's really easy, but that's in terms of inconsistencies. I'd say a lot of suppliers for the first time are considering how to do specialty coffee in Uganda. So it's much less developed than a lot of other countries. But it's also what makes it exciting, right? Because potential is endless. And the country produces a lot of coffee, and still because farmers have such a low yield. So imagine if you actually worked on farmer training, getting farmers to actually produce a better yield from their crop. If you had more operations set up to do this kind of quality, you have a huge potential.
Thank you.
Okay, then of course, sorry, these are the people behind King Estate. So that's Kingsley in the beginning there. And this is Ada. So she started working from the sort of beginning stages with him, and now she is doing the accounts, and he's going to go to school and increase her skill set. So that's also really great to see that an operation like this can invest in the people in the local community, which is something that King Estate is and Kingsley already interested in doing. So they also work with the local school, where some of the money that they make from the coffee is given to supporting kids in terms of with books and uniforms and that kind of thing. And then this is Willie, he's the guy who's managing the drying tables and when coffees are ready to come off. So he's always walking around with his humidity reader on his shoulder. So yeah, I just thought it easy who the people are behind the King Estate coffees. Then Bulambuli is the other operation that we have been working with in the east of the country. So that's in the Mount Elgin region and on the border of Kenya. So Mount Elgin is a mountain that goes into Uganda and into Kenya. So if you go to Kenya, you also have coffees along Mount Elgin. So the two areas are very far away from each other, and there's definitely a difference in sort of the culture around coffee. The area where Bulambuli has that benefits, let's say, of sort of some transferal influence from Kenya and the ways of producing coffee there. It also can be problematic because producers will happily take their cherry across the border to sell it as Kenyan coffee if they're not getting high enough prices in Uganda. This is everywhere in the world, so that kind of stuff does happen. This is a new project we started because we wanted to really have an emphasis on focusing on natural production in Uganda. It is it's a way coffees are produced, I spoke about the Robusta, but of course not at the level of quality or in the way that we would like. But we also see it as just a really good way to showcase the coffees, is to produce a natural, in a controlled and quality-minded way and introduce these into the market. I mean, the wash are of great potential too, so we will do both. But that was the idea around starting this, and we started with, we have a local partner there called Ben, who we work with on this station or this setup. but we've also partnered with a bigger company called Ibero, and they have more infrastructure in terms of people on the ground to work with, like field officers going out and to visit the farmers that the cherries delivered from and working with them on how they produce better qualities, how they increase their yield, how they should pick, when they should put fertilizer on the trees, and all that kind of stuff is really important. We don't have the infrastructure to have 20 field officers out in the field in Uganda, maybe one day. So finding the right kind of partners in this way was something that's been very important to us through all of our operations in different countries. And so that's the setup here. So it's a washing station. It's sort of two parts of it. One part is a washing station, a little bit like Kingsley's, and then the other part is like a separate area that's a drying yard. Because of course for naturals, what you really need is just loads and loads and loads of space to dry coffee. So this is a picture of the washing station to give you an idea of what it looks like and how it's set up. So you come to the gate at the bottom, but this back or top end here is actually sort of the delivery point for cherry. And so this is where all cherry is received, even the cherry that is processed is natural and taken to the drying yard. Will all first be received here, and then mostly or from farmers in the surrounding area. So just some images. This is what some of the farms look like. They even have, so the main crop in this part of the country is sort of September through to January, February. They can have a small fly crop, which would be now, but it's not a good enough volume that it makes sense to operate your sites because your operation costs will be higher than the volume of cherry you can pass through. So some farmers will tell you, yes, we have that great volume now, and why don't you buy the crop? But the reality is they may individually, some might have really nice volumes, but others won't. They just won't be enough overall volume to make it sustainable to process during this crop. So we talk about this region actually having one crop. That's not entirely true, but yeah. So this was like a picture taken now. There is like cherry on the trees, but we have these coffees coming in now. They'll also be on the table, and we have one more shipment to still be shipped, but then we won't see these coffees again until late next year. I should have mentioned this before, but the western side of Uganda has two substantial crops. So they had a crop around September, October, and then they're going into another season now. So there we process both crops because it's a substantial enough volume that it makes sense. So these are starting off with like the coffee side of things. This is farmers in the surrounding areas that we visited. So this was Simon, who's very proud holding his handful of cherry, which was actually a gift he gave to me. So I returned this group of cherry, which I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with. And Thomas. And both of these gentlemen actually had like really beautiful farms. I was really impressed because the trees were like incredibly healthy. The soil was like amazingly rich, and so it was like quite interesting. You drive through the country, you see a lot of like really sort of haphazard looking coffee farming, and then coming to the side you saw like a big difference in how farmers are working and thinking. We also had a lot of conversation with them around what we're doing there, what we think of the coffees, what our plans are in the future. So also like a mentality in the mind that is quite different to some other parts of the country we traveled in. Back to the washing station. So here is where the cherries will be delivered. These tanks are for doing floating. So the same thing that they were doing at King Estate, but in a different capacity or scale, let's say. But it will be the cherries, water, they will be stirred, and then the floating cherry will be removed. From there, the coffee then goes through a pipe into the eco-pulper. If it's going to be washed, it will be pulped. It will be washed through this channel, long channel that you can see leading down there. These bits of this area here, when they're out of season now, so of course it looks very clean and like there's nothing going, or there's nothing going on. But here would usually be these trays with metal grid on. So once the coffee is washed, it would immediately come here and then be taken into this warehouse for the sort of skin drying. So that's like a process by which they dry the coffee while it's covered for the first phase, and then it just goes out into the sun. And then this is the inside that closed environment of the drying tables that they have constructed there. So at the washing station, they are doing the washed coffees. They have started some. We have started really just this last season with them. So we wanted to really focus on two products, like a washed and a natural, and just do it very, very well. But the long-term plan is to also do more different kinds of fermentation and experiments. And they already, even though we said, okay, we can wait, they've already started to do some small experiments here, which I got to cup when I was there, and it tastes really amazing, actually. But they did those at the washing station just because of they were doing them on a very small scale. But in future, they would also have to use the drying yard because there's more space there. And then the drying yard, so that's where they're doing natural coffee, so the whole cherries dried, all on raised beds, which is also like a very different thing for Uganda, rather than just on the ground on the tops. And then they're also sometimes doing the sort of finishing the parchment drying for the washed coffees. So this is what the drying yard looks like. It's kind of endless. There's just like tables and tables and tables. When we first started, they had built tables and we started to receive cherry, and then it was evident that they had not built enough. So they've had like 2 phases of having to build more tables, just to also help you understand what it's like when it comes to like drying cherry as natural. It takes a lot of space and time. They have these double layered or storied structures, but they're not so happy with them because of course there's a difference in the sun on the bottom and on the top, and it's very hard. You can do it in a different way, but here it would be very hard to move or to rotate the cherry, which would be problematic. And that's Ben on the stairs there, whose land the setup is on, and he's one of our partners in the process. So here more tables and some shade netting as well. And then this was what it was like when it was in season with cherry on the tables. When I was there now. And that's it. Thank you so much.